Engagers, this is Professor Game, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who bring us the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration to help us in the process of using games and gamification in our daily lives, for example, to learn what we are teaching. And I am Rob Alvarez. I work at Ironhack, teach at IE Business School University, and so much more, and host this podcast. If you have an extra second, please go ahead and subscribe for free to our email list at professorgame.com/subscribe. Hey Engagers, welcome to another episode of the Professor Game podcast. And today we're going to be doing a special episode where I'm going to be sharing with you a small part, or a big part, I'm not sure yet, of what has been my experience at a bootcamp that I am making at Ironhack. As you might or might not know, being part of this amazing company allows for some special and very neat benefits. One of them, or actually I would say one of the best of them, certainly being the possibility of participating in one or more of the boot camps, and the one that definitely caught my attention personally because of my background, because of what I do here in the world of game design and gamification design, gamification consulting, all of these things that I definitely argue are design practices. That is why this bootcamp that is related to design, especially UX, so user experience, and UI, user interface design, is something that powerfully called my attention. You know, the whole concept behind design thinking, which I've researched a lot, I've kind of applied many times, but this is definitely, I found here a very interesting opportunity to actually be applying the design thinking to something very concrete, you know, to get a lot of feedback, to even work with other colleagues doing the same thing. So it has been actually an amazing opportunity for learning. And today I am going to be sharing with you the design sprint, which has been one of the things that we have worked on. There's a lot of public information around the design sprint. In fact, you can see on the image of this episode on my webpage, of this episode, you look for UX UI Bootcamp Design Sprint Lessons Learned. You will see an image of the book upon which this is inspired. There's the book. There's plenty of videos on YouTube. In fact, we watched several of those for the class, so you can get a lot of inspiration there. In fact, one of the ones that we followed quite a bit were the ones on YouTube of AJ, so letter A, the letter J, and S, or AJ and Smart. This is a company that has been publishing a lot around this. And even at this point, they have even evolved the design sprint from 5 days, so one for each day of the week. They have actually evolved this into a 4-day design sprint. And it's actually what I'm going to be discussing throughout this episode with you. Perhaps you want to take some lessons home. Perhaps you even want to try it by yourself. See, you apply it to some kind of project. It will definitely be an interesting thing to test out for yourself. Again, listener beware in this case. The idea is that this is a full 4-day sprint. So ideally it would be another disclaimer. Of course, I am doing the bootcamp part-time. So my experience has been with a part-time remote bootcamp, which has been, again, absolutely amazing. At Ironhack, this is the UX UI bootcamp part-time remote that I am doing at this point. So that has been my experience with, my specific lead teacher and teaching assistants, etc., etc., etc. So I'm just going to be sharing some things that, again, you can also find online. Today, in particular, I'm going to be discussing the design sprint, again, from my experience. So the design sprint has, as I mentioned, 4 days. Day 1 is what they call currently map and sketch. There's plenty of things that you can do here, but here the basic thing is to understand what it is that we are going to be working on and have the first approach to some potential solutions. I would say that is the focus of day 1. That is sort of the way that it goes through. And it has a series of steps. I might be, misstepping or going one first before the other one. Don't worry. Again, if you put AJ and S on YouTube, design sprint. You will find plenty of material there. Probably even have some sort of series around this. And there might definitely be others who are doing this. The author of the book, The Design Sprint, is Jake Knapp. So Jake, Knapp. He has, I'm sure, plenty of videos as well. There's a lot of information online. And there is, again, the official book. So if you want to go there, there's a 5-day design sprint. This is, again, from my experience, from what I am able to remember. So that day starts with what they call the expert interviews. The idea is that with the expert interviews, you take a look at what is going on. The experts, depending on what you're working on, can be different people, of course. Let's say you're working on solving some problem you're having in your school. So the experts would be the people who deal with this problem day to day, who are some form of stakeholders, or who have some sort of expert information around the topic that you are thinking of perhaps tackling, or the whole landscape of what you're thinking of discovering. So there is where you make some interviews. You start asking these people what are the things that they know, what are the things that are happening, for them to describe, maybe what are the problems that are going on, what are the things that they're doing, what are the things that they're facing, maybe some difficulties. And during those expert interviews, there is a special thing. This again in design thinking and all these things, it has had many different questions. The way that this was sort of approached in this case was with what you might call the how might we type of questions. So how might we do this thing? How might we have a better checkout process in the app? How might we get users to actually click more on the purchase button? How might we? There's many types and ways of approaching these how might we's questions. Again, plenty of information online. I'm not going to get into the full, nitty gritty of the details of what we did exactly, because again, there's also, a certain level of privacy. We did this one in Teams, and that is a very important thing that I might have maybe started a little bit on that one. The idea of these design sprints is that it's not something typically that you sit down just by yourself. The idea is that you have a group of people. You'll see that there's some things like, taking a vote, and there's a decider. There's a few people who are involved in this whole idea, so that you are solving, big problems in your company. And here you're involving, they have the person who's called the decider. This person has sort of a little bit of extra powers in voting, and even though he or she can take the consideration of what other people are voting for, what other people are thinking, definitely that is there. He or she has to empathize. They also have sort of the final shot in many ways. And in other cases, they even if just it is, having 2 votes instead of 1, that does make a difference, definitely. And because this, as I said before, the first thing is the expert interview. So you have the people who know about this, and then you have sort of the design team and a group of people who are there thinking about these things, a team that you put together or that you are a part of, and you start taking notes. You're doing the expert interviews and you take notes, and they always talk a lot about Post-its. You will see that Post-its are used all around the place. So here, the idea is to write in every single Post-it that you're going to write on one how might we question. With those questions, the idea is that you're also going to start building a map, right? So you build a map of what is the whole journey that you want to take your customer through, right? You have the how might we questions, you have the map that you also build of the journey, and there you will be starting to put the how might we's that you then vote on them as well and see which are the most relevant ones for this group that is going to be tackling these problems for this week. You put them on that map of the user journey and see where along that map, where along all those actions that the user is potentially taking to reach their final objective, where are the how might we's more focused? And that is probably where you want to sort of zoom in and say, this seems to be a very important and interesting thing. And the other thing that is very important here is to take a look at the long-term goals. You sit down and say, well, we're thinking as a company that, in 2 years, we want to be in this place, right? So you sit down and you write that as a long-term goal. This is the place we want to be at, right? The design sprint is not going to get you there. It's not going to make 2 years pass in a single week. Of course not. The idea is that then the problems that you're actually going to focus on are at least a tiny part of that long-term goal. You want to make sure that whatever it is that you're working on is actually leading you towards reaching those long-term goals. With the long-term goal in mind, the idea is that you then start making that's sort of the optimistic view that you're looking at into the future, saying, this is where we want to go. Then you have to take a little bit of the not so optimistic view and start making questions of what might go wrong, what are the difficulties that we might face getting there. And that is what they like to call sprint questions, right? After having the map that you have on one side and then the long-term goals and the sprint questions that you put them together, the idea is that you then start making a little bit of research on your own. You start looking at, potentially some competition. You might be looking into your own product or service. You might be sort of looking at the landscape of what is out there. Individually, each of the persons of the team is looking at this, sort of looking around, spending some time on that, and then sort of from the ideas that they find there, they make what these people call the lightning demo. You will also be finding definitely videos that either contain or are dedicated entirely to this. Once you have done all these things, you put them all together, you have the long-term goals, the sprint questions, you have the map with the how might we's questions, you have the lightning demos. The idea, as the name of the day says it, we're in day one, map and sketch. So we have mapped all of these things, and the next thing you want to do is sketch. And they provided us with a 4-step sketch, sort of way of approaching this. And it's sort of a shortcut that they're taking to make it a little bit faster. The sketches are definitely individual. And the idea is with all the information that you have, you probably want to put all of these things in Post-it notes and you have it sort of in a board. You start looking around and taking some notes, right? Again, probably in some Post-its. You start taking notes, looking at all the things that are out there. Take all those notes, and then you sit down by yourself and take some of all the ideas and reference that you had there and start taking it into sketches. You actually start sketching some whatever crazy ideas. In fact, they have the crazy 8s. So the idea is that you sort of have 8 potential, I think that was the exact way of doing it. You had sort of 8 potential crazy things that you might be doing to solve the problem that you're thinking of tackling, right? Once you have those crazy 8s, you actually pick one of those things or maybe a mix of 1 or 2 of those things and actually sit down and do your solution sketch. It typically has, I believe the number was 3 steps. So, the solution that you're going to provide has, first the user is coming from wherever they're coming, and does this, then the next sketch is this, and the next sketch is this other thing. And that way you end the day. You sort of put those sketches from all the members of the team, but you don't show them yet. You come back on day 2, and that's the first thing that you're going to do. But that is sort of the end of day 1. Let's make a very quick recap of what that looks like. You start the day with making some expert interviews to sort of look at what is going around, taking notes through the how might we's questions. Then you also do a map of, sort of what the user is the user journey is going to be happening. You take the how might we questions that you also kind of voted on and you put them on that map to see where your focus, your attention is going. You'll probably realize that pretty quick. Then you start thinking as well of the long-term goals, the sprint questions. You go through the lightning demo after making some of your sort of individual research that you did on your own. And you go into sketching, and sketching looks like taking notes of everything that was out there, taking those ideas into some sketches, doing your crazy 8s, and finally doing a sort of formal 3-step sketch that is going to be the thing that you're going to be kind of presenting. You put it somewhere, but you're still not going to show it. Day 2 is all about deciding and actually getting to storyboard. They have as well some sort of methodology to decide. The idea is that you do sort of the revealing of the sketches. It's sort of an art gallery where there's all of these sketches. Then everybody sort of silently goes around and creates some heat maps. You want to see what are the things that gather the interest of the team. And they use all sorts of forms of voting. They usually use some sort of little colored circles or stickies that are circles. And by the way, I'm saying sticky notes and these stickers as well. But in our case, we were doing this online, so we were actually using software, which kind of got the same idea through of sticky notes and these points. But again, you put these and people start saying, oh, this sounds interesting. Oh, I'm actually going to put 3-4 points here because this is super interesting to me. You put all those around there. Then the facilitator is going to be what they call a speed critique. Sort of, oh, this is what I understood from this. This is what's happening here. It's not to criticize anybody. And by the way, the idea is that these sketches don't have to be assigned to a person. Oh, this was a great job by Rob. This was a terrible job by Rob, or whatever that looks like. The idea is that here you're focusing on the sketches themselves. It has nothing to do with the people who made them. So again, you do that, you do a speed critique to see what people are understanding. Some people may be asking sort of questions around, but the idea is not that the creator answers them, but it's the sketch is the one that is answering the questions, and anybody can sort of jump in and say, oh, this is what I understand from that sketch. Then you do things like straw polls. Then comes a super vote, which is, again, the decider. You remember I mentioned that person before, who's a part of the team. And you finally sort of decide what it is that is sort of the main sketch that is going to be guiding the rest of your creation, right? So with that sketch, the idea is that you then have to create a storyboard. And the idea of the storyboard is that they say, well, we have this way of doing it as well. Storyboard, they talk about the 6 action steps to get to the goal. So the idea is that then you once again go back to your individual work. You have sort of 6 spaces, and you have, maybe 6 sticky notes as well. And you see what is the first step and what is the final step. And then you start sort of filling in the gaps of what that would have to be. So you create sort of a mini storyboard of this way the solution that you think would be, the way to build that solution that you're thinking of. You take those sticky notes, and again, in this shared space that you have, maybe a board or something similar, you bring that, you take yours, and once everybody's done, you go out there and you start saying, oh, step 1 is this, step 2 is this. Everybody one by one does this so that everybody can see all of those ideas. Again, you go again for some voting. Then there is, sort of the decider as well. It gets to have a final pick. There is going to be a winning flow. Again, it doesn't matter who made it. You sort of circle it out, say this is the winning flow that we're going to be doing. And you then open a place to where you're going to be sort of creating the prototype. And instead of 6, you're going to put 8, because typically, again, there's some more level of detail that you might have wanted to sort of dive deeper into and didn't realize, or didn't have enough time, or didn't whatever, because again, this is just sort of half of the day. And you put it into 8, you put it out there, and there you have the storyboard ready for you to go into day 3, which is prototyping. But before that, again, I'm going to make a quick recap of what day 2 was. Day 2 starts with deciding. Remember, the day before, we had those sketches. You put them out there. You reveal the sketches. You do the heat map, which is sort of places where people's attention are going. It doesn't have to be a sketch. It can be a step. It could be a part of the sketch. Just start putting those votes, see where the interest is going. You do a speed critique, sort of discussing what the ideas are. Again, very, very quick. It has to be very timed out so that you don't spend all day. You could spend all day critiquing any of these things. You make a straw poll so that people actually make a poll and vote, the super vote from the decider, and now you have decided what is the sketch that you're going to be working mainly on. That sketch has to be turned into a storyboard, and you do that individually. 6 action steps. You start with, the introduction, whatever they start. Then at the end, go through all of these. You again share it on the board. Everybody says it out loud. You then vote. There's a winning flow, and you move that into the actual storyboard, perhaps with 8 spaces, so that you can actually start working on that prototype. And that's how we get to day 3, prototyping. Very important, especially for this day, is to have a quiet room. Very, very quiet. Why does it have to be very quiet? Well, very simple. The idea is that here there's going to be everybody on the team is going to be working together collaboratively or individually. That depends on how you're going to be doing it, but they need to be uninterrupted. You're going to be spending a full day creating a prototype. The tool that we are particularly using and that I'm actually loving and enjoying is Figma. Figma is a tool that serves for many, many things, among them prototyping, some sort of app, screens, or whatever that's going to look like. So the idea here is that you have a quiet room. You're going to, maybe out of the 6 or the 8 screens that you have in the storyboard, you might want to prioritize which are the most important screens out of that. So you make sure that at least those screens are going to be considered, are going to be taken into consideration in that prototype, because what you don't want to do is to sort of bog down in the details of things that are not so important. The day is over and that you didn't really get to those screens. What are the important screens? The screens that are basically you have some hypothesis that you want to validate. Typically, when you're creating these things, what you want to do, and as I've talked about it in gamification as well, is that you're assuming that people are going to be interested, people are going to be reacting in a certain way to what you're creating. And those assumptions is what you want to validate. So, well beyond just making small changes on existing UI or whatever that looks like, user interface, you want to be focusing on those big assumptions. What is the thing that you're going to be changing that is going to be really making that deep difference? So those three are the ones, 2 or 3 screens, those are the ones you're going to be doing first. They always talk about doing something called time boxing. So you spend, 2 hours of the day on the screen, 1.5 hour on the screen, 1.5 hour on the screen. And another thing is that within that time boxing, and that's a time boxing technique, you've probably heard the interview we had with Nir Eyal. I've mentioned him way too many times recently, but that's amazing. He's an amazing person. He's an amazing author as well. And his book, talks about this. But time boxing is a strategy that's been used for many things. And here, time boxing is important to make sure those screens get done. Whatever gets timed, on that allotted time, you'll be able to manage that. Give it, of course, sufficient time so that you make sure of that. But within that time boxing as well, you also have the check-ins. So if people want to sort of check in and see how things are going, put it scheduled so it's not just, every 15 minutes somebody's coming in and interrupting the team. You want them to be able to be there, for a certain amount of time doing deep, focused work and not be interrupted. If they're going to be interrupted, that they will during the day, have it very clear and scheduled, maybe 2, maybe 3 times during that day. So there's somebody sort of checking in and everybody sort of sharing what's going on, where you are, and that's it. The rest of the time you want them to have that quiet, dedicated time. And that is it. That's day 3. Those were some recommendations, but day 3, you basically spend it only and exclusively prototyping, creating that prototype to be able to validate on day 4. Because day 4 is all about testing. You're going to be spending all that day testing with different users. One, you need 2 people to be doing those interviews. We're getting to day 4. One is going to be actually guiding the interview, making the interview, and one other person is going to be taking notes. That person has to shut up, basically do nothing except taking notes of what they're observing, what they're seeing the user do, and what they're hearing the user say as well. The idea is that you have 2 types of post-it notes. So the positives, what the user found positive, what the user found negative is another color, because they're going to be interacting with that prototype that you create. Figma is fantastic for doing this. You click on a button, it becomes a prototype and people can sort of click through it if you created the interactions. It is, you don't need to know how to code. You create a prototype with that, and that's absolutely fantastic. So that is what we used. We actually, since we were online, we were using online tools so that people were sort of sharing their screen. We could see what they were doing. We're taking notes on that. Maybe at the end, making some questions. That was the interviewer and the other person taking notes. Or you can also be recording this interview so that you can then refer back to it or take the notes if you didn't the first time, right? So it's very, very important to be able to take those very detailed notes. The interview, you have to make sure that the person you're interviewing is relaxed. Remind them that they're not being tested as you are in the university. You're being tested to see what your knowledge is. That's definitely not the case, especially not for the user. Your solution, you as a designer, is the one who's being tested. So the pressure sort of is on you. They need to be relaxed. Everything is okay. Everything that they do is okay, is great. You want to make sure that they are in that position. If you're going to be making questions or sort of explaining general things, start from broad, very easy things to sort of ease this person into getting into the interaction and doing the things that you want them to do. And then after every one of these interviews, guess what? Where are you going to be taking notes? Yes, Post-its again. The idea is that you take these notes in Post-its. Again, as I said, 1 color for good, positive, and 1 color for negative things that the user found or that you found from the interactions of the user were positive or negative about your prototype. And then you're sort of going to be putting them again in a shared board. You perhaps want to classify them by different stages of the process or of the prototype, and you're going to have sort of one column for each of the users that you're going to be interviewing, because ideally you will be, of course, interviewing several users. Of course, you're going to spend all day doing this, so you want to be doing definitely more than one of these interviews to validate what your hypothesis is. Remember that these are, this is qualitative. This is not quantitative. It's, we interviewed 4 people and 3 out of 4 said that this was not good, but this one, they said that it was good. So, it's not good, right? It's not qualitative. It's not quantitative. It's not about how many people you interviewed. It's about the quality of the things that there's qualitative data that you're going to be picking up, seeing what are the reactions, how do they feel, where are they getting frustrated, where are they getting stuck? Because again, you're going to be testing out your prototype to be able to then refine it and have a better prototype towards the end. Maybe even between the interviews, you might have an opportunity of upgrading the prototype very, very quickly. Oh, we realized this. They don't recommend it much. There's sort of 2 ways of going into that, but you might even want to be doing that to be able to improve and get to a more refined version. Or you spend, the first half of the day doing some interviews, you make a very quick iteration and spend the other half with the next interview, see how that changes as well. Might be a good idea. I don't know. I'm putting it out there. Kill me if you don't like it. Kidding, of course. So that is the idea. You have that summary, and that summary that you have, that wall where you have all the positive and the negative, is going to be very, very useful, because the idea is that you use this to then be able to present all these UX ideas that you got here. There are many ways of presenting these ideas. There's many recommendations out there. I took one of the ones that I found and put, sort of the general structure of how you want to present these ideas. You're going to be presenting them to stakeholders usually, right? So the stakeholders could be people in the company. It can be, your director in the school or the academic director at the university, whatever that looks like. So the idea is that you are going to sort of present your findings and sort of justify the changes that you as a designer are proposing. So you're going to provide, initially what they say is, provide some background context, sort of what is the situation, then state the problem very, very clearly, the pain of the user that you're there to be solving, the insights that you got from your research. Remember, you did sort of the expert interviews, the how might we, the mapping, all these things that you did. The insights, you don't have to sort of show everything that you did. You want to present the insights. What are the things that you were able to find through that process of research? Then, of course, that exploration, that prototype, that refinement that you did, all these interviews that you did with actual users, you want to present how that went. What are the findings that you got? And throughout these 4 different sort of stages that you're going to be doing in your presentation, the idea is that in every one of these steps, you're going to be, and this is very important, explaining what was the rationale, what was the rationale behind the design ideas, decisions that you took. You said, we did this and not this other thing because we realized that the user is this, or because we have engineering constraints or technology constraints, or because this would actually be faster than this other thing and they seem to be equivalent. Justify your design decisions throughout the whole presentation. So that's it. We went through the 4 days. We also went through the final exploration. Remember the 4 days. Day 1, we had map and sketch. Day 2, decide, doing all those maps and sketches to decide what are you going to pick and create a storyboard. Once you have that storyboard, you want to go into day 3, which is actually doing the prototype. Once you have that prototype ready, you actually create the prototype to, pick up some data, pick up some qualitative data, and that's what day 4 is all about, which is when you're going to be testing with actual users, which all of this information is there to be able to present your UX findings to finally make some sort of decision. Typically, you're going to be deciding upon something in the company, wherever your stakeholders are at. That is where you're going to be making that decision, and that's where the decision you're going to be presenting. Engagers, I really hope you found this episode, especially if you not only enjoyed it, but which definitely I hope you did, but especially found it useful. So give me your feedback. I'm very open to hearing what you have to say about this episode, what you thought. If you want more about this, the UX bootcamp that I am taking is 24 weeks long. It's part-time, yes, but it's long and very, very intense. So if you want to learn a little bit more about my journey, some of the things that I've been learning, I'll check out as well what are the things that I can very openly share of what we've done, maybe some of the results. I don't know, maybe I'll even check back with my team and see what they think, what can be shared as well. Let me know. I'm very curious to see if you're finding this useful as well. I might be doing more of these episodes. I think many of the lessons that I'm learning here can be very, very useful for you guys and gals, of course. And that's it. That's it for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm very happy to be back. As you know, I went, and you mentioned this in an episode prior as well, that went through COVID. There was even for the first time, and I'm going to mention the elephant in the room, for the first time in almost over 4 years, actually, we had 1 week without publishing an episode. I'm not going to apologize because I was deep in the mud with many, many things going on, including, sort of recovering my schedule back from COVID. So I'm not going to apologize. Because of that, I'm going to apologize to you because I'm sure that many of you were expecting that episode. So I'm not apologizing because I did something wrong, but because I know many of you were expecting that. And again, this is hopefully not going to happen again. We've always been very well planned. I've taken vacations before. I've done many things where, in theory, you would say, oh, then there's not going to be an episode. And yes, we've had episodes every single week and will continue to do so. So again, let me know if this kind of episode is something that is interesting to you. There are many ways to do so. You can find me on Twitter at RobAlvarezB. You can also definitely subscribe to our email list. When you subscribe, you get an email. Just reply to that email. Let me know. We might be sending out surveys eventually. You might get that through the email. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'm Rob Alvarez. If you type Professor Game, you'll probably just find me. There's not too many people who put that on LinkedIn, for sure. So many ways to find me. Put me on Google, Rob Alvarez. You'll probably be finding me. Professor Game, you'll also probably be finding me. I'd really be interested in getting your feedback on what you think about these types of episodes. However, as you know, at least for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over.